Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I'm your host, Wendy McCallum, and I have with me today my friend and my, Pam, I don't even know how to describe you. You were basically my website guru / fixer for like years and years and years and years. So welcome, Pam.
Thanks for having me.
I would like to do you more justice in terms of an introduction. So why don't you let people know what it is you actually did for me? Because that was a terrible description of it. Because we've been working together. I mean, we started probably, like a decade probably. So those of you who remember me as Simple Balance, Pam was responsible for the second iteration of my website. And then anyone who remembers Use It and Lose It, and my online membership program around food and the membership site, Pam built that beauty. And then when I sort of transitioned, I guess, over to Wendy McCallum Coaching, you built that first website there.
Yeah, well, all I did there was help you with that part. It was a theme. So I just you were already flying on your own pretty well. You're one of my best students. Pick things up pretty easily. So all I did was just nudge you in the right direction. And for the most part, you flew, you were great. And then you transitioned from that into where you are right now, which is
and I love working with Pam because that was one of my goals whenever I do things is to figure out how to do it myself so that I can become self-sufficient. And Pam was so great with teaching me and helping me learn over time how to do a lot of these things myself. And now the website that I have now is largely built by me with some help, a little bit of help from some consultants. But basically now I feel very comfortable doing a lot of things that in the beginning I couldn't do. So that's how I know Pam. And I feel like, Pam, we also have connections through some friends too, because we do live close to each other and we have some people in common in our lives.
Yeah, for sure.
So the reason Pam's here today is not to talk about website design and tech stuff, but to share what I think is a really interesting story. And it's also a story that it's a story about something we don't talk about very much. And Pam and I just happened to be having a conversation one day, catching up, and she told me what had been going on with her for the last few years in terms of her health. And I was not aware of it. And I thought this is a topic that would be really helpful, I think, for women to understand more about. And I think it's a part of this missing conversation that Sarah Bailey and I talk about a lot. And Pam graciously agreed to come on and share her story around uterine prolapse, which is two words, honestly, I'd never heard before. So
neither had I.
But sounds like not an uncommon occurrence for women. And I've done some research since we chatted, Pam, and by no means am I an expert on this. I mean, obviously, but I'm just going to make that clear right up front. I don't know very much about this, and I'm not going to be trying to give any, health advice around this topic. But I do think that, Pam, you're in a great position to tell us what this looks like and hopefully give us some, from the benefit of hindsight for you, some helpful information that other women can use to navigate this, and maybe even prevent this from getting to the place where it got to with you. Yeah. So why don't we start, Pam, by you just kind of define uterine prolapse so that people know what that condition is.
So prolapse can happen in a lot of different pelvic ways. So mine was uterine, which meant that my cervix actually fell outside my body and actually lived there for a really long time before I was able to get any sort of level of care. But other people experience different kinds of prolapse, one of them being a cystocele or a bladder prolapse. That would be probably the most common one that women experience, where they, for example, they pee when they run or they walk or they sneeze. or just involuntary. They can be just, they'll stand up and they'll wet themselves. And that's probably the most common kind of prolapse. And it's probably the one that most people are familiar with. I'd never had any issues with that. And even when my uterus prolapsed, I still didn't have any bladder issues. Even now I have some minor ones post-surgery, and we'll get to that. But my problem was all just this lovely cervix that was hanging out of my body. But other women have had, so cystocele is one, erectocele is one, where your rectum goes into the back wall of your vagina and then basically can prevent you from going to the bathroom, and you can suffer some pretty severe constipation. There's also a complete vaginal prolapse. A vaginal vault is like when your whole vagina actually collapses. A lot of times that happens post hysterectomy, if the vaginal vault hasn't been suspended properly. And that one is a pretty serious one. There's an enterocele, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, but it's when your small intestine actually slips in as well. But women, live with this all the time. And I had no idea when it happened to me. I didn't know what it was. I saw something fall out of my body and I thought, oh my God, should I go to the emergency room? What is wrong with me?
And to be clear, we're talking about falling out. We're talking about it falling out of the vagina, right?
Your vagina.
Yeah. And the same, that's where if you have bladder prolapse, that's what happens there as well. And that can happen, as you described, that can also happen with other organs. So, I mean, this is, when you told me about this, I was actually embarrassed about the fact that I had never heard of this and did not know that this was a thing.
Conversation.
Yeah. So
talk about it.
So how did this, what this look like for you? Would take us back and kind of tell us the story of how you got there.
I mean, for me, I think that for a lot of people, it happens post childbirth. I'd say that the majority of women, this is a result of childbirth. And maybe that's what caused mine. I mean, my last child was born 17 years ago. So, I mean, unless you know what you're looking for or you're experiencing some symptoms, you really aren't that aware of what's happening down there. I mean, I certainly never looked at my vagina. I never took a mirror and said, oh, well, that's what it looks like. But I was at a spin class, which is completely random. I had been trying to lose weight, which I think everybody, can relate to at some point or another. And I was really enjoying the spin classes, and I went to a spin class and they get you to hop out of the saddle. So I'm biking on the spin class and all of a sudden I just felt something pop. And I'm like, what the hell was that? And I sat down and it felt kind of squishy.
Yeah.
And I kind of, wet myself a little bit, not from, I didn't pee. There's a discharge that comes with I'm sorry to be graphic about this, that comes with the uterine prolapse. You're often sort of leaking this fluid. Right. And I went home and I took a mirror and I looked and I'm like, oh my God, what is that? And I got one leg up on the counter and I've got a mirror down there and I'm like, what's going on here? And, immediately I didn't call the doctor. I went to Google and I'm Googling. Right. Thing hanging out of vagina, and of course your searches become a little bit more intelligent as you read through all of the information. And then finally I'm like, well, I don't think it's a bladder prolapse. I think, cause you can see a little hole, your cervix has a little sort of a hole in it. Sure. And that's my cervix hanging out of my body. And I called my doctor, and of course, given the medical care in Nova Scotia, it was 2 months before I could get in to see my GP.
So can I stop you for a second, just to put a timeline on this? So your last child was born 17 years ago.
17 years ago.
When was this spin? How many years ago was this spin class?
So this will be 3 years ago now.
Okay.
So we're in 2021. So 2018, 19.
Okay. So your second daughter was already 14, 15 at this point.
Yeah. 15 years old, something like that for sure. 15, 14 years old.
And how old would you have been, Pam, at the time of the
My mid 40s,
Mid
like
40s. Yeah.
46 years old, something along those lines.
So I just did a little research before this. Again, I Googled this. I tried to use reputable sources. I was on the Mayo Clinic, just kind of getting some information about uterine prolapse. And one of the causes of this can be, at least in part, shifts in hormones, which I thought was fascinating because I
didn't know that.
Yeah, but I didn't know that, Pam. And obviously on this podcast, we talk a lot about hormones and midlife and the shift in hormones. And this is one thing that we have not mentioned at all yet, which is, again, another reason why I wanted to talk to you about it. But the shifts in hormones, particularly postmenopausally, I think. Yeah, with estrogen can have an impact on this. Okay, so
I was in perimenopause. Absolutely. Then
right.
I was in perimenopause.
Okay.
My periods were irregular. Like all the parts of my body were not familiar at all to me. Like things were just happening to me that wasn't expecting. So I was hardcore in peri at that point. It was, a good 14 years after the birth of my last child. I will preface this by saying I've always had issues with, like, I have IBS really, really bad. So I fell into the category of constipation, although I've never been constipated. I go the other way.
Right.
But when you're in the bathroom all the time, that's pressure, that's pelvic pressure.
Right.
And my assumption, to this day, there's no way to know for sure what happened to me, whether it was hormones or childbirth, or I coughed too much, or that spin class, or I don't know what caused it. There's no way for me to know. But I suspect it's because I've had years of IBS and horrible stomach issues. That's my suspicion. I don't know.
Yeah.
And certainly, some people would look at it as, well, maybe it's not just one thing. Maybe it's a bunch of things that cause it, but we don't know, because as a female, we're not even educated on this in any way from any doctor when we're going through the healthcare system. This came out of left field for me.
Right. Which is why I wanted to talk to you, because my guess is it comes out of left field for most women. Like, you're just going about your business. Well, frankly, you're in the middle of perimenopause. So nothing makes any fucking sense anyway, because there's all this crazy stuff happening in your body. And then all of a sudden this happens and you're thinking, oh, great. Just another random.
One more thing to add to the list.
Exactly. Okay. So what do you do after you self-diagnose this? You call your doctor and it's a 2-month wait.
Yep. Just to get into my GP.
Do you not see anybody for 2 months? You have this.
I went to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist.
Okay, so great.
This is my first experience with pelvic floor physiotherapist. It was not a positive experience. Mm-hmm. My second one post-surgery, and I guess we'll get to that later, was a much more warm, friendly, happy experience. It definitely was night and day to my first experience. My first experience left me feeling like I was broken, like I had done something wrong. I had caused this. It's your fault. I felt very finger pointed. I felt like I wasn't exercising correctly. I felt like I hadn't been walking correctly. I didn't hold my body correctly. She just basically, I felt very trashed when I walked out of. And I saw her 3 or 4 times. And I just, after the 4th time, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I'm walking out feeling worse than when I came in. I'm not doing anything correctly. I'm just going to wait for my GP. And
in the meantime, your uterus is still prolapsed.
And it's getting worse. It's falling out farther and farther. So the first time I looked, it was sort of like, if you picture this as your vagina, and I'm doing this, a video, of course, like we're talking, but it was like, maybe a centimeter below sort of the top, that part of it was exposed by about a centimeter, but right. 2 months later, I was a good 2 inches out, and it just kept progressing past that for the next 2 years.
That must have been so uncomfortable.
Super uncomfortable. It's a good thing I have a desk job, because I sat, wow. I think in the last, and I'm starting to lose the weight I gained, but I wasn't able to walk or run or spin or exercise. I couldn't do anything because it was so uncomfortable. And I was terrified that I would make it worse, that something else would fall out of my body.
Sure. And yeah.
I had no idea. I had no idea what was going to happen. So I just stopped. I basically stayed in place for 2 years because that was the only thing I felt safe doing.
So I assume that after a couple of months, you get in to see your GP and then what happens?
Well, it's funny because you go in to see your GP, and I have an OBGYN at the time. She's retired now, but she took one look. She's like, well, your cervix is literally winking at me. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, well, I don't treat this, but you have a uterine prolapse, and I don't know what else is prolapse because that's not my specialty, but let's get you in to see a urogynecologist. And that's what at first she actually said, get you to see a urologist. And I'm like, okay. But I had done some research, up until then Googling forever about what to do. And I said, shouldn't it be a urogynecologist? She goes, well, the wait for those are like a year and a half. I think we'll get you in to see a urologist. So I'm like, okay, you're the doctor, you know what's best for me. Anyway, so she put the requisition in with a urologist, and it bounced back to her 3 months later. We don't treat these. You need to send her to a urogynecologist. So I lost 3 months.
3 months later, they tell you they can't help you.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
I know. So it was at that time, it was March of 2019. So I'm like, well, now what do we do? And she's like, well, I'm going to put in a request for you to see someone she gave me the name of somebody in the women's health clinic at the IWK. And then my requisition was in. And in the meantime, you can self-book for an appointment for a pessary. So a pessary is a piece of medical grade silicone that you stick up your hoo-ha, and it holds all of your parts in place.
It's like a ring of some sort, isn't it?
There's so many different shapes. And for most women, these are lifesavers. For me, it wasn't. My uterine prolapse was so far gone that I would stand up and it would pop right back out.
Oh, geez.
So it just wasn't an option for me, but you have to self-book for this appointment at the IWK. And it is the only place that you can have a pessary fitting in the Maritimes, maybe not the Maritimes, but definitely Nova Scotia. The IWK is the only place. And the waiting list for me, I booked that appointment in probably December of 2018. And it was June of 2019 before I got in to see the pessary clinic. And I had to self-book that. My doctor didn't book it. I booked it.
And when was just for the timeline. Yeah. So do you remember what month the actual prolapse occurred when you were at the spin?
Yeah. It happened in mid-October, 3 years ago. I was
in October of 2018.
October of 2018.
So October of 2018, you have the prolapse, and in December of 2018, you try to see
my doctor.
You see your doctor, and then you try to self-book for this pessary, but you can't get in for that until June of 2019. And in the meantime, you don't see any other doctors?
Nobody. Well, just the pelvic floor physiotherapist.
Right. Yeah.
A horrible experience. That's it.
Right. Okay. And so what happens then? What happens after that? So now you've got a pessary that's not working, and it's been then 8 months or something. And what happens next?
You wait and you do nothing. There was nothing, no one I could see, nothing I could do. I thought about flying to Montreal. I thought about paying out of pocket to see a specialist. But the funny thing about Nova Scotia is that you can't just go see a specialist. You have to be referred by a specialist to see a specialist. So the only person who could refer me to see another urogynecologist was a urogynecologist.
And you're still waiting for that appointment.
Well, waiting for that appointment. I didn't see my urogynecologist until June of 2020. During and COVID, of course, it was supposed to be February of 2020 or March of 2020, I mean, and then COVID put a kibosh on that. And it was June or July of 2020 that I finally met with the urogynecologist.
Okay. And so what did they say?
That I had a grade 3-4 prolapse, uterine prolapse.
What does that mean? What does the grade mean?
So it grades from a 1 to a 4, with 4 being the worst. I had the worst. 1 is your uterus has descended somewhat into the vaginal canal, to a little bit more, but not below that level of, I'm going to call it the level of demarcation, because that's how I speak. So it hadn't descended below the vagina. Grade 3, you're kind of popping out a little bit.
Yeah.
And you can't push it back in. And a grade 4, it's out of your body. And that's what it was.
Wow. Okay. And so what does the urogynecologist say is the treatment plan for this?
I needed surgery.
Okay.
So there was no, you can live with this, Pam, if you feel comfortable. This isn't a life-threatening thing, but it will affect your quality of life more and more and more.
Okay. Can we talk about, let's get really real here about how this is affecting your quality of life? Because when you and I were talking about this just casually that day, I was thinking, oh my God, this would just affect everything. Like, surely this is making it very difficult for you to have any intimate relationship with your husband. That's got to be challenging.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's the thing about sex with uterine prolapse. It doesn't hurt. Yeah. But you don't want to do anything real fun because you're kind of nervous that they're going to be grossed out.
Oh, sure.
That piece was, you're so worried that, oh my God, you're going to find me unattractive. You're going to think this is really gross. I think this is gross. You don't feel great. No, you don't feel great about yourself. And certainly you don't want to do anything standing up. So,
oh my gosh, Pam.
It affects your sex life. It affects your ability to exercise. It affected my ability to go to a party. So, you know how you go to a party and you stand around. I couldn't stand around. I needed to sit. Yeah. I couldn't go for a walk with my friends. I couldn't go traveling. And luckily it happened during the pandemic. So I didn't travel, but we had planned on going to New York City. And I'm like, oh, I can't walk around New York City with a prolapse. Right. So we canceled that trip. The idea of that trip, it was my daughter's 16th birthday or something like that, or it was a birthday. It was some kind of birthday. And we had given that to our oldest daughter when she turned 16. So we thought, oh, we're going to do this for our other daughter. And then, the prolapse happened and we never even bothered to book the trip. So travel was completely off the table. Any level of walking around the grocery store or going to the mall and shopping, like, oh man, like I love to shop. It is my therapy. And I couldn't go shopping. It wasn't comfortable. Yeah. So it affected everything for me. Like I couldn't wear a bathing suit. So because I'd wear a bathing suit and you could see the prolapse popping out. Right. So
I'm sure, I mean, I'm just trying to, I can't even put myself in your shoes, but I'm just trying to imagine what it would feel like. I have had times in my life where I haven't been able to exercise because I've been injured or there's been something going on. And I know that just even those like stints, I think the longest I've ever been injured is like a year. Your mental health just takes such a hit. And then on top of that, you're isolated, not by choice, but because there are lots of activities that you don't feel comfortable doing anymore. So yeah. And women, I mean, you are living with this thing from October of 2018 until when was the surgery?
December of 2020, last year.
How?
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Some women live with it even longer than that.
Yeah.
Especially in Nova Scotia, the wait for surgery is 2 years. So I was lucky to get in when I did. And I feel really lucky that I got in. I don't know that my mental health would have been healthy at all had I waited much longer than that. I was in a pretty bad place. Like I just felt I couldn't move.
Yeah. I can only imagine, Pam. I can't. And then all of this is happening on top of that. This is all happening while you're in the end stages of perimenopause and COVID.
Yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal.
It was brutal. And you don't want to, you kind of want to talk to your friends about it and you kind of don't because you're like, man, oh man, they can't relate to this, first of all. And I certainly don't want to beat a dead horse. You never want to make somebody feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So I just talked about it the minimum amount that I had to, and just let it be. And people are scared to talk about this because they're like, well, I don't even know what to say to you. Like,
well, this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because you told me this and I was like, immediately I go into my weird mode, which is like, let me ask all the questions because I want to understand this. But I think for a lot of people, it would be they would just have no idea what to say. And they're not women are not talking about this stuff. We can't even say the word vagina out loud.
Right.
Having this conversation today, part of this is just, again, I'm always trying to normalize this conversation around women's health, because women's reproductive health is its own specialized area. It doesn't impact men. And if women don't talk about it, then we don't know what's going on. And, I think they're probably, from what I read again on the Mayo Clinic, who knows, and you said, there are these various grades, which is probably what this was referring to, what I saw on the website, is that there are women can live with this. Women sometimes live with this. They just live with it. And I assume that would be more like a grade 1, maybe a grade 2 or something.
If it's not impacting your life too significantly, you can absolutely live with it. And certainly, and we can chat about this later, but I had surgery in December of 2020, and I still have some degree of prolapse, not uterine, but other areas of my body aren't quite where they were. So I know that, not that my surgery's failed, because it hasn't. The piece that I really needed taking care of but I've still had some issues. I'm not 100%. I don't know that I'll ever be 100%. And and I'm okay with that. Like, I'm comfortable with where I am right now. Mm-hmm. Lots of women figure out where they're comfortable. And if they go past that comfort level, that's when they start to think of other surgeries, interventions of whatever kind. I'm not there for this, what's going on with me right now, because I can go for a walk. I can stand up at a party. I can go shopping. I'll be able to travel once all of this lifted away, so I feel pretty comfortable knowing that I can handle the things that I need to do on a daily basis without feeling disabled.
Right.
And I think that when women feel disabled in any level, they just shut down and they need care. Yeah. But if you're not disabled, then you can care. Women handle a lot, man. They just go on their merry way. If a dude's bladder was hanging out of his penis, it would be an emergency situation. He would be at emergency in tears, like, oh my God.
That problem would have been solved a long time ago if men's bladders were falling out of their penises. Absolutely. Right. Yes. It's the same thing with hot flashes. That problem would have been solved many years ago. Night sweats.
Guys, such babies.
No. So, what was the surgery? So what exactly was done during the surgery?
Right. So the surgery was tough. It wasn't, and I was prepared going into it. I joined a book on Facebook called Association for Pelvic Organ Prolapse. And anybody who has this should look them up. And that resource was probably the best one for me. And I knew what to expect when I went into the surgery. So my surgery was just before Christmas of December 2020. And it was a 4.5-hour surgery, I think, something like that, with an overnight stay in the hospital, where they hooked me up with a catheter, which was awful. In fact, I would say that the catheter was, for me, the worst part of my surgery, except for the UTI that I got post-surgery. That was number 2.
So did they do a hysterectomy? What did they do?
So I had a partial hysterectomy, which meant that they took my uterus and my cervix, and they left my tubes and my fallopian tubes and my ovaries. They did try to remove my tubes, because apparently if they can, they will. Tubes are where most cancers start, is in your fallopian tube. So they did try to get them. And if they're hanging down a little bit, she said that was their, they would absolutely have gotten them, but mine weren't. They were up where they were supposed to be. So I had that. And then in addition to that, I had what was called a vaginal vault suspension. So what that meant was they used my own ligaments to basically tie the top of my vagina up. Some women, their tissues aren't strong enough and they need to get a ligament out of their butt. And if that had happened to me, I was warned that it could, I would have a really bad pain in my ass for about 4 to 6 weeks. I didn't, they used my native tissues. On top of that, I also had an anterior and posterior repair, which means basically I was sliced from my front to my top and my back to my top of my vagina and stitched together. And I had a perineal repair. So just like an episiotomy, I have a brand new sort of scar in between, my butt and my vagina. That's actually looks pretty good, to be perfectly honest. Like it was a nice little added benefit of that I'm nice and tidy down there now.
Yeah.
And that's what I had done.
Okay. And what was the recovery like from that? You said you got a UTI.
Tough. I had a pretty nasty UTI that I was nervous to take antibiotics because I was also on some pretty hardcore narcotics, which I didn't like taking, but I took probably 2 or 3, and I didn't want to take antibiotics on top of that. So I just powered through thinking that the UTI would go away, but a week later it wasn't, and I was in a lot of pain. So I took some antibiotics and kicked that out about 12 days later. So 3 weeks, the recovery was pretty tough between, not being allowed to lift anything. Like I couldn't even lift a grocery bag. I wasn't allowed to lift a pan out of the oven or a pot off the stove, nothing more than 5 or 8 pounds, nothing more than 8 pounds. And technically for the rest of my life, I'm not supposed to lift more than 20. I would say that I do, like I carry piles of groceries into the house. Like I can't avoid lifting more than 20 pounds. So I do what I can to protect my pelvic floor, but you have to be able to live as well. So yeah, I would go for very short walks. I would get very sore and very swollen very fast. I had a sitz bath that I had to, like, basically this sort of tub that you put, you might remember it after you've had a baby.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So you sit on that on the toilet basically and soak your parts. And that felt wonderful. Like that, I could have lived in that bath for most of my recovery. I didn't. I did it probably 5 or 6 times a day. And a lot of lying down. Like I just watched all sorts of Netflix, and I was in some pain, but nothing that really Advil and Tylenol couldn't. I certainly would not tell anybody to avoid the surgery. It's doable. I would say childbirth was a little worse than this in terms of a recovery, other than the UTI. Mm-hmm. But it was doable. Like I was surprised at how much easier. And honestly, you're so focused on the fact that, oh my God, my uterus isn't hanging out of my body. This is miraculous, that you can cope with a lot of pain. Women in general cope with pain pretty well, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think this is part of the reason why some of these things end up going on for so long, is that we're just, accustomed to, I think it's probably a combination of things. We probably are accustomed to discomfort and pain. Yeah. We've obviously, if we have had children anyway, we have gone through that. We've also just, as women, most of us have gone through period pain and cramps and all the rest of it that most men don't have to endure. So there's all of that. But then I think there's also this like missing conversation. We're just not talking about this stuff. It's just like, oh, maybe this is just normal. Maybe this is just part of aging. Maybe this is just part of perimenopause or menopause, because all this other stuff.
You're told by doctors. You go to doctors and they're like, oh, well, you're feeling like this. Get used to it, honey. This is the way the rest of your life is going to be. We're told to suck it up. Mm-hmm. Like, women are told by our doctors to suck it up. Yeah.
Or you're being told, it sounds like, by that, in that first pelvic floor physiotherapy situation, that it's your fault. And
my fault.
Yeah. Somehow who the hell knows how you're supposed to walk to prevent a uterine prolapse? Like, no one teaches you that.
No.
So
you didn't even know you had to walk a certain way.
I still don't know. Like, I'm probably walking the wrong way right now.
I'm sitting the wrong way right now.
So post-surgery, after healing, is that when you start seeing a pelvic floor physiotherapist again? So what's the purpose of that?
So nothing is allowed in your vagina for a few months. For me, it was a good 3 months before I was willing to let anybody do anything down there.
Yeah.
And And then I said, okay, I need to go see a good pelvic floor physiotherapist. And I had booked her right out of my surgery. So within 4 weeks out of my surgery, I booked in because she was something like 2.5 month, 3 month waiting list to get in to an initial appointment. And I'm glad that I saw her because it made me feel a lot better that my first experience with the pelvic floor physiotherapist was not normal.
Yeah.
I felt much more safe. She was very careful in explaining things to me. It was a good experience overall. Now, I only saw her 3 or 4 times, but for me, that was enough. I'm not a big person. I've never liked having people's hands stuck. I mean, of all of the things to happen to me, this was not one of my favorite things because I don't like that. Like,
yeah, no, I understand that. I don't know who does, but some people certainly are more sensitive to that than others. Yeah. I think we should stop and just let people know that we will be having a pelvic floor physiotherapist on the podcast. So for anyone listening who's wondering what we're talking about, I'm going to give you brief information because I've been to see a pelvic floor physiotherapist and Pam can fill in some of the blanks on her end. But we will be having a pelvic floor physiotherapist on, and Dr. Sarah Bailey and I are going to co-interview her. So that will be, I think, a really great session where you learn a lot about, because pelvic floor physiotherapy can be helpful for women for a multitude of concerns that women are or challenges that women have. This is one of them, what Pam is talking about. But what happens in pelvic floor therapy is there's an actual internal physiotherapy being done of your vaginal walls, the canals, and the
muscles, tissues, ligaments.
The associated ligaments, tissues, all of that stuff. So it's like,
and it's all internal.
Yeah. Regular physio, except it's inside. And so it is like, it's not anything like a gynecological exam, but the same type of stuff is happening. So
it's much more gentle than that.
Yes, much more gentle.
And very, like everything is warm and peaceful and nice, and you do not feel like you're in an overly clinical environment. And that piece kind of put my mind a little bit more at ease. It's nothing like getting a pap smear where they're sticking those things up you and your feet are in the air, your legs are on the table, and you're kind of, just kind of dropping them.
And I will say, like, I don't know what your experience was like, Pam, but with the pelvic floor physiotherapist that I see, who's wonderful, she is talking me through the entire thing. I know exactly what she's doing and why she's doing it, which because I'm such a nerd, I find it actually, it's super fascinating for me and also very comforting. And I also, because of the benefits that I have gotten from pelvic floor physiotherapy, I'm all about going back because it's really been helpful for what I've been going for, which is not what you've been going for. So anyway, that's pelvic floor physiotherapy. We will be, again, having a physiotherapist on and having like a really detailed conversation about all the other aspects of it. Pam and I are kind of just giving you our experience with it. So you went to the pelvic floor physiotherapist a handful of times, and the goal was to help you strengthen your pelvic floor, or what was
and to make sure that I was protecting my new pelvic floor, because I've been rebuilt like a robot, and I've been stitched from here to there, and I need to make sure that if I don't want this to happen to me again. So I need to make sure that I'm exercising correctly, that I'm doing the correct core exercises to make sure that I am holding myself correctly. And I do these every day. I do the exercises that she gave me. I do them sometimes 2 times a day. And religiously, to try and build my core strength, make sure that my pelvic floor is reacting correctly with my core. And these are lessons that can be taught. So,
Yeah. So, because my next question for you is, I know that you still have, obviously you're doing these exercises regularly. I know that you and I talked about how you have to be really careful with your diet, because if you
get constipated or diarrhea or anything like that, I don't want that to happen to me.
That's just placing pressure on your digestive tract, which is placing pressure on your colon, which is placing pressure on your pelvic floor. And so you want to be really careful to make sure you're eating enough fiber, drinking enough water, all of the things, which for someone with IBS obviously requires a lot of care and diligence. That's a tough thing to do. Is there anything else that you're doing that you need to do differently now that you have been diagnosed and had the surgery?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing for me is it's exercising. So it's learning to walk and learning how to tilt my pelvic floor properly, learning how to protect it if I'm doing a squat. And a squat is a normal part of daily life. And my pelvic floor physiotherapist was extremely direct about that. And I said, well, my surgeon told me never to do a squat again. Mm-hmm. That's what my surgeon said. You cannot do a squat. This is off the table for you. And then my pelvic floor physiotherapist said, no, that's impossible. You have to squat. It's a functional movement. How are you going to get laundry out of the dryer or get a pot from your pot drawer, right? These are functional movements. So I'm like, you're right. So I went back to my urogynecologist and I said, what about like doing these things? She goes, oh, yes, you can do this. I just don't want you to do powerlifting. I don't want you to do so you have to be very clear on what you can and can't do with your urogynecologist and with your pelvic floor physiotherapist. So for me, I thought squats were off limit, but they're not. I just have to limit the amount of weight I do, make sure that my form is correct, which it still sucks, but I'm getting there. And I mean, that's really my only limitation. And sex was, the other thing that I was really worried about, and surprisingly, it's fine. So I thought that it would be, a lot worse. Mm-hmm. I have had a little tiny bit of bleeding that kind of freaked me out at one time, like not the first time, but maybe the second or so. Mm-hmm. And that went away pretty quickly as well. Right. But there's some little things there, but other than that, that feels a lot more normal to me now too.
And if you were to look back to like a couple of years ago versus now, how's your mood and your self-confidence? And
the fact that I can walk my dog, in the morning, and I had to be reliant on my kids and my husband to get my dog out. And if I went for a walk with them, it wasn't far. It was like around the block. I can do a 5K every day. I do it every day now. I get out in the morning and I drag my dog for 5 kilometers, just because I can, and I couldn't before. So my mental health is better. It's still not perfect, but I can exercise. So
that's great. I'm so glad you got it. I'm so glad you got treatment for this, but I also am not surprised at all, but, as usual, disappointed in the care that's just the system of care for women in particular. I have, talked about this on the podcast before in terms of my own experience with this around menopausal symptoms, which have been, as I was saying to you, they're pretty aggressive for me. But what I have learned is that you have to be your own best advocate in the system, at least where we are, we're in Canada, and in our, it's not that much different, I don't think, in other parts of Canada, but particularly where we are in the Atlantic provinces, you have to be really, your own best advocate, and you will probably end up with a piecemeal level of care, like where you have a variety of people supporting you with pieces of this. There doesn't seem to be any
cohesiveness.
Thank you for providing me with the word to my menopausal brain. Did you see me? You could see me. I was like trying to gather it. If you're not,
because I feel it.
If you're not watching the podcast, you're listening. I'm making this motion with my hands where I'm trying to pull the word out of the air. There doesn't seem to be any cohesive care. Unfortunately, very often you don't get a cohesive care plan. It's piecemeal, and you have to just keep going and asking the questions like, where do I get the support for this versus that? And, that's really frustrating, but it is what it is right now. What do you want women to know about this? So what do you either wish you knew earlier, or that you think might be actually really helpful for women to know about what you went through?
So there's a few things. One of them is, I wish I had looked at my vagina before I had babies and after I had babies, and in the years following that. I wish I knew what I looked like, what was normal for me, so that I could identify what wasn't normal for me. So that's probably my biggest thing I would tell every woman, is to check yourself out, figure out what you look like down there. And everybody looks different. Don't get me wrong. Especially after childbirth, y'all look a little bit different, but you have to know or understand what your baseline is to know what isn't your baseline.
So important. I think I really just want to spend a minute on this, because this is so important. And I was not doing this either. But then been talking to Sarah Bailey and the pelvic floor physiotherapist. And I realized I need to know what, I'm putting this in air quotes, normal it looks like, so that I can, so that I will have a sense of when something is changing. And I think this is important in all areas of our health, but for whatever reason, while it's obviously all of the taboos and everything shame and everything else we've been raised with as girls in this society, we don't do that. And we don't look and we don't talk about it. And so we don't know. And then, I mean, I guess you're just then left with, for you, I'm guessing that one of your things might be like, trust your intuition when it feels like, when it feels like something's not where it's supposed to be, it's probably not where it's supposed to be.
Right. But it would have been nice to have a baseline.
Absolutely.
Some kind of a baseline. I mean, don't go take pictures, but I mean, unless you want to, you can, but
nothing wrong with that.
No, I remember trying to look for normal vaginas. I would Google normal looking vagina and all I would see was porn, right?
Of course, yes.
So then of course that became my Bible. I would look at naked girls. My husband's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I just want to know what a normal one looks like. Anyway, so I did that for a while. Then I'm like, I realized there is no such thing as normal. Every vagina looks different. I found a really cool site that actually showed different women's vaginas. And I'm sorry if there's any dudes listening to this.
Oh, there's no dudes listening. There might be one random guy. And if he's listening, then God love you. If you're listening.
Yeah.
And share this information if you have a female person,
wife or girlfriend,
whatever, mother.
Yeah.
But no, that's actually really important. There was I don't know if you saw it during the pandemic at some point. I watched a Goop series, so the Gwyneth Paltrow series on Netflix, and she had an episode kind of on this. And I was actually, I don't love everything about Gwyneth, but I was actually really happy to see someone talking about this in a really open, positive way. And I think it's important for us to recognize there's no standard in terms of what that area is meant to look like. And that it also changes drastically post kids, as you age, all of these things contribute to that. So, okay. So the number one tip is
look at your vagina.
Get out the mirror and
get out the mirror and look at your vagina. Okay. And then the other thing is introduce the conversation to your GP or whoever your primary care person is about pelvic floor health before you have babies. After you have babies, as you enter perimenopause and menopause, you need to be having these conversations with your doctor. Your doctor is not going to talk to you about them. So you need to figure out how to talk to your doctor about them. You need to be aware that there are resources available, and it should be a part of every person's post-pregnancy plan. Everybody, it should be a non-negotiable item. You have a baby.
It is in France, right? We talked about this.
Yes, it is.
It is a part of postnatal care in France, and at probably other places too, but I just happened to hear this about France.
It's definitely in France.
Yeah, but it's not here. I didn't even know pelvic floor physiotherapists were a thing.
Neither did I.
Until maybe 6 months ago. So yeah.
And there's not very many of them in the city. There's some good ones and there's some not so good ones, but there's really, as a subset, it's a very small area of specialty.
Yeah.
And considering that women account for 50% of the genders out there, there should be better representation for female healthcare, but there's not. There should be, but there's not. So introduce the conversation early with your primary care physician. Learn how to hold your core properly. I never knew, I thought core was sit-ups. That's what I always thought taking care of your core was, it's doing good sit-ups, having good abs, but it's not. Your core muscles are really deep and they support your pelvic floor. And it's so important to have that connection to them. Yeah. So, core exercises, I'm by no means am I an expert, but there are exercises that your pelvic floor physiotherapist will give you that help you to build core strength. And that's really important.
I would say that what I've learned is that, which was really surprising to me, and I'll probably talk about this again when we have that pelvic floor physiotherapy episode, but I was being told how to do things at the gym. So I've always been like a bit of a fitness nut and a, gym rat, for lack of a better word. And I've been told to do things at the gym that are actually completely contrary to what I need. And so my pelvic floor therapist just said, no, God, don't do that.
Do not do that.
Do not hold it like you're holding in pee. Don't do that. That's really bad.
Hold your breath. Don't hold your breath.
And also the other thing I've learned that's been really fascinating is the connection between how we breathe and our pelvic floor health. So there's also a lot of, there are a lot of different things you can do and some things you can focus on in terms of how you breathe that can actually have a really big impact on the tension in those muscles and how so it's a complicated area. But I think I think what you're saying is really great. Like, talk to somebody about what you should be doing. I would honestly say to women, go see a pelvic floor therapist.
Anybody should. It should be like going to a dentist.
Right. Even if
it should be part of your plan. It should be part of how you take care of yourself. Go get a massage, go to your pelvic floor physiotherapist, go to the dentist.
And then you know what? It's like a baseline mammogram, right? Like they might say to you, everything's good. You look great. No
come back in 3 years.
Yeah. I don't know, but I wish I had done that because I've actually been I've had some chronic stuff that I'm like, oh my God, this is connected to my pelvis. I had no idea.
Yeah. No idea. Nobody talks about it. So how are you going to know?
Exactly. Okay. So we've got, so far three things to do.
Yeah.
One,
talk about it to other women.
Talk about it to other women.
Make sure that there's conversations about these things with other women. You shouldn't be scared to talk to, and and I get it. It's uncomfortable to talk about female stuff. It really is, but you have to, because there are women out there who have, like, I have a friend who, I was talking to her about this and she's like, I actually, sometimes I'll just pee myself, like, for no reason. I'm like, that's a prolapse. That's a pelvic organ issue. You need to go see somebody about that. And she just lived with it. She never told anybody. She just went forward because she's like, well, this is in my body. And she was wearing pads all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is I love this last suggestion, unless you have another one. Do you have another one?
No, those are the big ones.
Okay. That's the big one. So I love that one as the one to kind of end on, because I think this is exactly what we're trying to do with this podcast, which is fill in some of the blanks in this missing conversation so that hopefully women will take, the learning that they get from this podcast, Pam, and from you being so, just so open about all of this and honest, which is amazing, because I think it's going to help women out there, and they can take what they've learned and they can go and talk to their friends about it and not have any embarrassment or shame around this topic, because it's happening all the time. The reproductive system is one of your organ systems in your body. We should be talking about it like we talk about circulatory health, like we talk about digestive health. And we're not. And so I'm very, very thankful for you coming on today, Pam. I really appreciate you being just so candid and open and honest about this. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope it helps somebody.
I feel very confident that it will. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to cover today?
No, I mean, the only thing, is I really want to encourage people to go to the Association for Pelvic Organ Prolapse. They have a website and a Facebook page. And those are incredible resources with a really solid group of like 17,000 members, something like that. Oh,
perfect. So what I'll do, Pam, is I'll stick that in the show notes. I'll put them in the show notes. So if you or somebody is struggling, or you think you might be struggling with an organ prolapse, I will put the link to that website in the show notes for this podcast. So you can go grab it from there, and feel free to share it with anybody who might benefit from that. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Pam. It's been lovely catching up with you.
You too.
And just so everyone is clear, Pam is also an excellent website designer. So if you have website design needs, feel free to reach out to me and I will put you in touch with Pam, because she's awesome. Okay. That's it for this episode of Bite Size Balance. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. If you've been putting yourself last for way too long and are worried that you're burning out, grab your free burnout checklist at www.wendymccallum.com/checklist. That's www.wendymccallum.com/checklist.